Right, well, it gives me much pleasure then, just very shortly, to introduce Mr Angus Taylor. Angus has been the Member of Parliament since 2013, represents the seat of Hume in the Commonwealth Parliament. He's a graduate of Sydney University and also of the University of Oxford, and attended there as a Rhodes Scholar. He has a rural upbringing, which must make him a good bloke, and was heavily involved in various forms of agribusiness before entering Parliament. He was a minister variously for energy, emissions reductions and industry in the Morrison government, and is now the Shadow Minister for Defence. Mr Taylor, we're very pleased that you're here and look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's absolutely wonderful to be here. Can I pay tribute to the work you do? Dan Tian said to me, who I think is your local member, yes. He rang me and he said, this bloke, Michael Arnett's going to ring you and say you've got to come to Canberra on a Saturday morning and to speak to the Defence Reserve Association. He said, you can't say no to this one, Angus. You'd never say no to Michael. But I think that's a great tribute to you, that your power of persuasion, exactly, and the work you do is well recognised, and all of you. The fact that you are all here in a government building on a Saturday morning, giving your time, says a lot about the group of people we have in the Defence Reserve Association, in our reservists more generally. I have not been to a conference on a Saturday morning in a Canberra government department building before, and that says a lot. So well done. Thank you for your service, for what you do, the role you play every single day as reserves and reserve supporters. It is incredibly important, incredibly important. For my part, I have not served in our military. I was lucky enough to have 4 wonderful years as a cadet, which I remember fondly. And I still ask myself why I didn't progress from that to the reserves at Sydney University, where I went, where there's a strong regiment and has been for a long, long time. And in some ways, it's a question that leads me to some of the things I'm going to talk about in a little while, which is how do we strengthen our personnel in defence in this country? I think there are a lot of opportunities that are missed. I was one of them. It's on me that I didn't do it, but I suspect if I'd had a letter or a call from the regiment, I would have done it. And there's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of people out there who I think we can attract to be involved in defence in this country who are not. And that's something I'm very, very keen to prosecute in my role. I've been in this role for 90 days. This is probably one of the few groups in the country that doesn't need convincing that bringing external skills to bear on defence is very, very helpful, and I think it really is, and I've seen that already in my short time in this role. I've obviously, in other roles, seen much of defence. In cybersecurity, for instance, I work very closely with ASD, and I've seen the extraordinary capability we have in defence in this country, and hugely respectful of it. But I do see some of the background I have in business and economics as having real value in looking at some of the issues we are seeing we have to deal with in defence. And I want to talk about some of those issues and then spend a few minutes on reserves in particular. But if you look at some of the issues we're facing, we are seeing great power conflict, or the potential for it, emerging on a scale that we haven't seen for a long, long time in the world right now. And the game theory of that, which is something we understood well during the Cold War, is re-emerging as a major issue for us now. The industrial realities of capability, military capability, I think are bearing down on us in a way that hasn't been the case for a long, long while. The workforce and skills base we need, which I mentioned a moment ago, I think this is incredibly real like now, and is relevant to what we're talking about here today. The fiscal and inflationary pressures on defence, which, Michael, you were, I think, sort of implying in some of your comments, I think they are incredibly real. And I've felt this as the Shadow Treasurer, trying to work out how do you get spending to 3% of GDP. We grappled with this day in, day out for a long. We got there before the election, but frankly, it is unbelievably difficult, I can't tell you. And I am sticking to it, let me tell you. Having spent all of that time working with colleagues as to how we could present an opposition budget in our case with defence as 3% of GDP, we are not backing away on that one. We are not backing away on that one, and I've told the Shadow Treasurer that is the case, and you've seen us make those announcements. But all of those things are incredibly important, and I think bringing external skills to bear in defence, moving in and out of defence, is something we need to see more of, not less of. And I know the reserves are great advocates of that point of view. Let me make a couple of comments about the strategic environment we face right now. One of the greatest political challenges I saw when we were in opposition in the last term, and I've seen this previously when we were in government, is how to build a social licence across Australia to say that we need to spend upwards of 70, 75, $80 billion a year on defence. That's 3% of GDP. Because you know when you say that, it means taxpayers have to pay more, or other services that people want or expect are not going to be there. Every dollar has an opportunity cost. Now, we can all say, and I firmly believe, that spending money well in defence can have wonderful flow-ons for the rest of our economy. I think that is absolutely right. But we still need to explain why that kind of money is appropriate and necessary. And I think the starting point for this is to recognise the strategic environment we face in the world right now. It has become common amongst many in politics to not want to talk about that in any explicit way. We must. We must. We are facing authoritarian regimes flexing their muscles around the world on a scale that we haven't seen. We haven't seen since the end of the Cold War. We are facing what most experts will say is the most dangerous strategic environment since the end of the Second World War. And I think that is absolutely right. We've seen it in Russia invading the Ukraine. We've seen it in the behaviour of Iran and its proxies in the Middle East. And let's be honest, we are seeing it in the rapid militarisation driven by the Chinese Communist Party of the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, who are prepared to engage in live-fire exercises not far off the south coast of New South Wales. I mean, this is not a major trade lane. This is not the South China Sea, and they're down there with live-fire exercises. Authoritarian regimes in the world are seeing the weakness of the West as far as they are concerned, and they are prepared to exploit it. Now, I've long believed that whilst the international rule of law is incredibly important, it is underpinned by real politics. And that real politics requires strength. Peace, which is the objective here, always. Peace is achieved through strength and deterrence. Weakness is provocative. And it is incredibly important, all of us who are engaged in this world are able to tell that story and the importance of it to the Australian people right now. I think there will be way more appreciation of the need for a bigger role for reserves, for a bigger role for the military in this, the ADF in this country, if there is much more explicit discussion about these risks. None of that is at odds with saying that the Chinese diaspora in this country play an enormously important role, and we should be very proud of those links. None of that is saying that I, with an agricultural background and resources background, don't want to continue to trade with China. Look, to be honest with you, let's remember, I grew up just south of here, wool farming operation. We've just finished shearing on my farm about an hour from here just this week. We sold wool to the Soviet military for uniforms right through the Cold War. It's completely consistent with strategic conflict to still continue to trade. I think it's an incredibly important thing to want to continue to do. But we should be hard-headed about the strategic environment that we do face now, and it's very, very important that we are all, we talk about it, and we talk about it in a sensible, rational and thoughtful way but not in a way that skirts around the edges of the reality of what we're facing right now. Now, in that environment, I think there's a number of themes for us as an opposition that we're going to continue to focus on. One is that defence funding is not where it needs to be. We think it needs to be at 3% of GDP or higher. That's not because the Americans want it, that's because it's the right thing to do. It happens to be that all around the world we're seeing developed countries like ours moving to those sorts of numbers. And if you include a whole lot of other things, infrastructure investment and veteran support and so on, you're getting to a much higher number than that, of course. And NATO has agreed to move to those sorts of numbers as well. I think this is important. And it does then provide the flexibility to deal with some of the issues that are coming at us. We need to have that funding. That doesn't mean that every dollar we're spending now doesn't need to be spent better and well. It does. It absolutely does. And I don't think we spend every dollar as well as we could. And we need to be clear on that. Coming from a business background, a farming background, I've got to tell you, one thing you learn in farming is every dollar needs to be spent well. Every dollar needs to be spent well. And that should be true of our Defence Force as well. Because this is taxpayers' money, and people have worked incredibly hard for that money, and we should never forget where the money comes from, and with that comes enormous responsibility. But I would say there are 4 additional themes that for me are important in thinking about defence going forward, and I think this has enormous implications for our reserves. The first is we need to move from rhetoric to readiness. If it is true and you accept that we are facing the most dangerous strategic environment since the Second World War, then readiness really matters. And we were very disappointed to see that the preparedness reports, the readiness reporting, official reporting process that had been in place in the past has stopped. In peacetime, it's always difficult to be able to test your readiness. Conflict tests readiness. We've seen that in conflicts around the globe in recent times. In the absence of that, we need a way to do that. And that's why those reports were so important. And we're going to continue to press hard on moving from rhetoric to readiness. Readiness really matters. Part of that readiness is having the capacity of our reserves in this country, which brings skill sets from across the board, as I talked about earlier. There is a degree of redundancy in one sense in reserves, but actually that's power. That's enormously enabling for this country to have a whole number of people. What was the number you used earlier, Michael? 5,000, 7,000 full-time equivalents that you've got now. Of course, what that doesn't say is how much more we could bring forth if necessary. And that is a very, very powerful thing to have access to if we are to be ready. To not see the reserves as part of the essential ingredients of readiness seems to me to be really missing something. I actually didn't appreciate that reserves weren't mentioned in the strategic plan or the defence plan, and I think that is a big miss. The second theme that I think is enormously important at this time is agility. Agility is not something always associated with things done by governments. And agility is something that in peacetime, again, is difficult. It's difficult because you're not being tested. You're not being tested. But we need way more agility. I mean, if there's something we're learning from the conflict in the Ukraine right now, is agility really matters. New technologies are disrupting conflicts. The role that drones and counter-drone technology is playing in that conflict, we all hear about it. There's no question that is enormously important. And so we need to be able to move much faster to adopt new technologies, new capabilities that are emerging. And they are emerging at a rapid pace. I think AI is going to play an enormously important role. The speed at which it can digest information and make something of it with huge data sets that we're getting increasingly in this day and age, I think is very powerful. And we have to be able to harness that. That means bringing skills in from industry, from business, and vice versa, by the way. And those porous links between reserves and full-timers, and changing the language, which I know has been something that you've been focused on, to recognise that, I think is very, very important. If we are to have agility, it means agility in moving skill sets across the military, across the ADF, and across the private sector into the ADF as well, which is a hugely important role for all of you to play. The third theme is sovereignty. And, sovereignty is consistent with alliances. The best way to achieve sovereignty is to have great alliances. What great power in history was able to achieve what it needed to achieve without strong alliances? It's enormously important. But we've got to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and say to our allies, hey, look, we're doing our bit. And that does mean we have to have sovereign missile manufacturing in this country. It does mean we should have our own nuclear submarine capacity, albeit working very closely with our allies from the United States and the UK to be able to develop that capability. It does mean we should play a role in the sustainment, the deep sustainment of nuclear subs from our allies, and particularly from the United States here in Australia. And I was just over at Henderson earlier in the week, looking at the potential for us to play a role in doing exactly that. These are new skill sets we need to bring to bear. What's not well understood, by the way, is that nuclear engineers from Australia, Australian nuclear engineers, are playing a hugely important role in both civil and military applications of nuclear technologies across the world now. And we should be absolutely making the most of that, and I think the reserves can play a role in that as well. And then the final theme is personnel. It is clear we are short of the personnel we need in our Australian Defence Force. The Strategic Review has told us that. ASPI has told us that. Many other people have told us that. It's clear we're short of the government's own targets. We need to bolster that. I think an incredibly powerful way to do that is to say to young Australians, hey, you can have a career in the military. It doesn't need to be full-time. It can be full-time for a period of time. I absolutely love the ADF, the gap year work that has been going on. That's probably something I would have done back in my day. I had a gap year before it was fashionable to have a gap year, but it wasn't with the ADF. But I tell you what, that is just such a great program, and we need to see more of this. If we are to get both the skills and the numbers to where they need to be, I think these sorts of innovative programs are the key. I think the reserves have an enormously important role to play. Can I thank you for the opportunity for speaking with you today? And can I say I'm really looking forward to continue working with you and the team, Michael. We will be laying out over the coming months and years what a defence plan which is supported by 3% of GDP looks like. That means we've got a bit of money to work with, but we want that to be a compelling plan. And I think working with the reserves as part of that is something we definitely want to do, and we really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. And I'm happy to take a couple of questions or comments as well. I'm in listening mode as much as talking mode on this. So I've really appreciated the conversations I've already had this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just curate some questions, if I may, while we're up here, and we do have some from the online audience as well, possibly. So, but I'll go to those that are here first. Are there any questions? Yes.
Good morning, Mr. Thank you very much for making history by coming out to a conference in Dublin on Saturday. My name's Eva Butler, I'm from the National Security College.
Yep.
I really commend your comments about the social licence we need to build defence spending to an appropriate percentage of GDP. That's necessary, but not sufficient. I'm really interested in how you think we can better utilise existing defence spending, as well as the spending at the budgets allocated to other government agencies, where we can really leverage initiatives such as dual use national critical infrastructure that can help us accelerate applications, and of course that then also links in, given the civilians involved in that infrastructure, a lot of those are tools.
Yeah. No, they are all fantastic questions, and I'll keep it brief because we could spend a lot of time talking about the answers to those questions. But let me make a couple of a couple of comments at least. I think we do have to spend every dollar incredibly well. I think that was the point I made. It was the point I made earlier. I think defence procurement is one area where, having worked in procurement in the private sector, I think we can do better. I think the ADF knows that. I think the government knows that, and particularly because there's just a huge range of things that the ADF is buying. But it's buying enormous capability, right from the big, ships and submarines all the way through to drones. You've got to have fit-for-purpose procurement, and every dollar has to be spent well on that. I think there's enormous capability out there in defence industry that we aren't tapping into as much as we could, including Australian defence industry. And I think agility around procurement is one area where I think we can spend dollars a lot better. The other point I'd make is your point about leveraging dollars elsewhere, and you talked about government. I would also include the private sector. I mean, Henderson is a wonderful example. Any of you get a chance to have a look at the potential there is over in Perth, and of course that's where the subs will be built. Ships are being built now, and there's potential to do deep sustainment. Not only of our fleet, but of the US fleet. Remembering that about a third of the US fleet is out of service at any point in time, right? There is no doubt in my mind that most of the money necessary to do that can come from the private sector, right? So leveraging private sector money as well. I think the potential here is enormous, and that will be good for our economy. I mean, these are high-end, high-quality, productive, high-returning investments, and so we really need to make the most of that, and I'm really excited about that opportunity.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Look forward to working with you.
Good on you.
And
Very good.
It's important you read this. I'll move on very quickly. There was one question. Just Josh, one for you. The online audience are just making the point they can't hear the questions from the audience. If they could be repeated before answering, or a microphone used by the questionnaire, thanks. I'll do my best to do that. I'll relay just the benefit of the online audience so they can hear the question clearly. I would just pick up, and whilst of course more money to be spent on defence is given our strategic circumstances, is challenging given the social licence issues, but imperative, and we're absolutely supportive of that. But we make the point that as a capability, you will not find a more cost-effective one than the reserve. And I would just, and I'm not going to quote the entire article, but I will just quote one paragraph from the ASPI article that we had published in the Strategist. The Defence Reserves Association contends that if even an additional 1% of the annual defence budget were directed to the ADF reserves, the effect would be transformational, potentially creating a much larger, more capable reserve force with greater readiness. For example, doubling the strength of the reserve component of Army would enable it to both meet homeland defence tasks, which is the role of the 2nd Australian Division, and support the permanent forces if they were committed to combat operations. And this concurrency would be vital in any national defence emergency. No one pretends that we would deploy operations offshore and have an entirely secure home base. That simply won't happen. The concurrent ability to both protect the homeland and deploy forces offshore and sustain those forces whilst deployed is axiomatic. You must be able to do all those things at the same time. So that's just one aspect of what we contend in terms of defence expenditure and how that money is wisely used going forward.